Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is October 14th, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update, and we are going to be asking ourselves just how bad are recently mobilized Russian soldiers faring now that they are apparently already at the front, and is Russia trying to go back on the offensive or just dig in for the winter? We're going to be breaking it all down right now. So first off, we are going to take a look at the tactical map going from north to south near the Kherson front or the Kharkiv front. You can see that there's been some small adjustments to the front lines. Most notably, they previously assessed that Russian forces controlled Ivanivka, but in fact, this is not true. It's still listed as contested, but as you guys can probably see here, this looks like basically a few roadway intersections, not really anything significant. Much more significant is Yahidne, and that's because it is an intersection of a much larger roadway, one that seems to link several of the nearby villages. So being able to seize anything along this major roadway is much more significant than a couple of, small trails. When we look to the south, right, we can see that there's been a more significant change, right? Russian forces have either advanced and have seized what were previously 3 contested villages, Topolivka, Zolotarivka, and, God help me, Verkhonokaminanka. Why is this significant? Well, you can see here, these are actually fairly industrialized areas, right? You can see there's some water reservoirs. It looks like there is some storage tanks of some kind and even a rail yard. So this is actually significant territory, and you can see it's on the outskirts of Lysychansk. It would be a tremendous failure for Russian forces to lose Lysychansk, right? Given that seizing these cities, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, were considered really linchpins in the Russian efforts to seize the DNR, LNR territory, right? One of the original independent republics that the Russians are trying to back. And so seeing Ukrainians on the outskirts of these cities is really, really worrying for Russian high command. So I imagine that they are probably either giving orders for these villages to be controlled completely. Up until yesterday, were listed as contested. But you can see, too, that defending this major rail network, right, this is an example of a rail yard. If Ukrainian forces can control and clear this rail yard, their ability to provide resources to a subsequent offensive would be significant. Again, you can imagine if their goal is to take Lysychansk, being able to advance and get a couple of kilometers out would allow them to start to consider bringing rail units in here, offloading men and material, and really resourcing a push into Lysychansk. So this is a significant chunk of territory, even though it just looks like some small villages. Zooming back out, you can see there's also been some changes near Bakhmut. Now, Bakhmut, we're going to talk later on. This is significant because Bakhmut seems to be the territory of the Wagner PMC group, who, as you guys know, is operating almost independently from the Ministry of Defense at this point. Ministry of Defense of Russia has really gotten a lot of bad press, and the Wagner guys are trying to distance themselves. And Pirozhin, the head financier of the company, a unit, are trying to prove that to Putin that his unit is actually the most combat effective. And you can see here they are either listed as having controlled or have actually seized almost this major major is probably being generous, a tactically significant intersection, Mayorsk, here near Mayorska. And you can see that being able to control this gives you access to a lot of roads that sort of feed into the front lines and feed into the more Russian-controlled DNR territories. So this is not insignificant, though I do want to point something out, is that you're going to hear about this later. Ivanrad and Oh man, this consonant chain does not appear in English. But this is significant because this is a really contested region, and it's right on the outskirts of Bakhmut. And you guys know if Russia can seize Bakhmut, or particularly if Wagner can seize Bakhmut, it would be basically the first major Russian operational objective achieved in months. So it would be a tremendous political coup for Pirozhin if him and his Wagner unit can actually achieve a battlefield success. And it would be humiliating for the Russian Ministry of Defense for them to be unable to affect any battlefield gains for months, and to have a unit made up of they're not even soldiers; they're employees. This is like having Amazon Prime, win the war in Afghanistan while the U.S. military is still taking L's to the Taliban. So tough. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. And finally, to the very south, you can see Russian forces are actually assessed as having controlled a slightly greater piece of territory in Pisky. Now, let's put this in context. The Russians have been trying to seize Pisky for some time, and they really have had a hard time achieving much of anything. You can see as we back up through time, you can see this has been a site of a lot of fighting and not a lot of progress. For weeks, there's been nothing here. And this is the first time we've seen some acknowledgement that Russia may have seized part of this like M30 and have total control of Pisky. But you can see that literally months ago, we were talking about their efforts to try to control the airport here, and they still haven't succeeded even in that. They're probably trying to flank around and take it, but it's if they can do so, right? As we've discussed, the Donetsk airport would be a operationally significant victory, simply because you can't have a capital city with no airport, and right now that's what they do. And even though it would never be certified for commercial traffic, it would take probably years of reconstruction. Military traffic can land on a pretty damaged runway. So if they could just clear the debris and fill in some of the potholes, they could start to bring in military traffic. But again, this has been months they have been trying to seize this. They have not come even close. And even if they seized the airport, they would have to clear enough space so that Ukrainian anti-air systems, which frankly are getting better and better by the day, can't pose a threat. So the chances of this happening in, this fiscal quarter are basically zero. So that is the map update. But what I really wanted to talk about is some of the news. And it sounds like even among Russians, the word is out that the partial mobilizations promises are basically not worth the paper they're printed on. Russian media has reported that 5 mobilized men from the Chelyabinsk area have already died in combat in Ukraine. And it's been just 3 weeks after Putin signed the partial mobilization order, which means that if you assume it took them a week to get drafted, that means that they were fighting on the front in as little as 14 days. That is a frightening turnaround rate, even for a newly mobilized soldier. To give you a perspective, in the Iraq War, even when the U.S. military was at its most desperate, its mobilized reservists, who, bear in mind, in the U.S., reservists will train on average 2 days a month and a 2-week training exercise in the summers, they would receive, let me make sure I get this right, they would receive at least 90 days of training. So you can imagine a Russian reservist who receives 0 days of training per year and gets a few days of training here. In fact, Russian mill bloggers are identified a specific combined arms army of the Southern Military District that recently conscripted soldiers were ordered deployed immediately with no combat training And actually, this was soldiers out of the Moscow Oblast, which we talked about. Russia seems to be trying to avoid giving the worst combat assignments to metropolitan Russians, right? Russians from Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other areas, because the war is already unpopular there, and that population tends to be a little more technologically adept and likely to communicate with friends and family back home in a way that rural Russians just don't seem quite as likely to do. So let's see if we can find it here. Yep, Mill bloggers noted that relatives found half of the 15th Regiment personnel, that's the mobilized regiment, in a Belgorod Oblast hospital after the unit was caught in artillery fire attempting to reach the front lines. The Mill bloggers noted that the regiment reported that they had no orders, no military command supervision, no signal equipment, that's radios, or supplies, and the other half of the personnel are alive, presumably somewhere near the Savatone front lines. Another Mill blogger said they saw the coffins of mobilized men arrive back in Chelyabinsk, Moscow, and some others have claimed, as I've discussed, that many newly mobilized men are just surrendering immediately to Ukrainian forces. We've discussed this as, frankly, again, I think that actually surrendering to Ukrainian forces is probably the best call for these newly mobilized troops, right? If you can give a civilian a uniform, but it will not make them a soldier, right? You have to be trained properly before you can undertake soldiering as a task. And even commanders, frankly, should probably be disclosing to these troops that if they can't contribute meaningfully to the battlefield, they shouldn't be on the front lines. They should be in a rear area undergoing more training, or they should be, frankly, ordered to surrender immediately if they cannot be sent back to the rear. That's just simply safe. And again, especially if, by all accounts, Ukraine is following the law of war regarding the treatment of POWs, meaning that they are treated as well as Ukrainian armed forces in terms of food, access to medical care, etc. So that's probably a world better than what they're being treated as Russian conscripts. Right? It says Russian military units are reportedly dispersing mobilized men among different units, but not keeping records of their deployed locations, right? This actually makes sense, right? You do not want to have an entire unit of people who have no idea what they're doing. The best chance, probably, I would guess, for these units, if you were an individually mobilized conscript, your absolute best chance of survival is to find a unit with all experienced soldiers, get assigned a literal battle buddy, an experienced soldier who is going to literally glue you to their hip and give you clear, simple instructions about how to survive on the battlefield and maybe even become combat effective. If they can somehow survive long enough, they may be able to do that. But that, again, means that one of your experienced combat soldiers is going to have to not focus on their fighting the war. They're going to have to focus on keeping this other jabroni alive. This is just completely a failure of command and control and organization, especially given that, as we see, Ukraine is still in the fight, but they are not launching major decisive combat operations. And as the winter and rainy season come into play, the pace of operations is going to slow. And what Russia should really be trying to do is defend its front lines, dig in hard, and buy time so that during the winter, you can train your newly mobilized conscripts, right? Again, Russia they're running this war so badly. There's so many bad signs, right? And when we look, for example, to ground.news, check out the link in the description, right? They're a huge supporter of the channel, and they are a great way to triangulate the veracity of stories in this era of misinformation and disinformation. But we can see center-leaning sources with high factuality are running this article, what's the state of Russia's missile arsenal? And the answer is basically they don't know. But what's interesting is that they do point out that Russia is using air to air missiles, surface to air missiles as cruise missiles. Right? They're using air defense systems and anti-ship missiles to try to hit like land targets. And this is a sign of desperation. Again, an air defense system is designed to take out aircraft, lightweight, low armor, easily damaged. They're not going to do a thing against hardened military targets, and they're just not that accurate, right? They're meant to track a heat signature, but an office building doesn't really have a heat signature. Even a military bunker doesn't really have a heat signature. So the fact that they're just throwing random missiles at the general direction of targets is a testament to that they really don't have as many missiles as they think. Now, it could be because the military wants to keep its more advanced long-range missiles for high-priority targets, but we've seen that Russia has a weird distaste for actually targeting military targets with its precision strike missiles. Instead, throwing them at schools and office buildings and stuff, which all makes me think that no, they may just literally be out of missiles. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you for today. As always, of course, if you want access to the uncensored combat video breakdowns, the kind that YouTube definitely won't let me show you, they've even started age restricting some of my content. So, which means that basically, other than it being in playlists or you having the link, you'll never be able to find it. You guys want to check out the Patreon. And again, I'm on the road. I don't have the updated Lieutenant Tier Patreon patron list, but I really appreciate all you guys. I see all your messages, and I'm really, really grateful for your support. And I try to give you guys the breakdowns of the viral videos that you guys are seeing that I definitely can't put on YouTube. Anyway, that's all I had. Thanks so much. See you in the next one.